Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to episode 329 of the Falcoholic Live. I'm your host, Kevin Knight, joined, of course, by my co-host, as always, Adnan Ikic. He's at Say Which Way. Adnan, how are we doing on this fine Wednesday evening?
Good. Weather is nice. We're been enjoying some NBA playoffs. No real stress right now. The Falcons aren't doing anything stressful. They're not in the news cycle. The Hawk season ended a while back. The Braves are trudging along, but yeah, we're good over here.
We're getting there. Yeah, we'll have to save an entire episode for is the NBA draft lottery rigged? That seems to be the most interesting thing to talk about at this point. But we'll save that for June. Because we're not quite to June yet, folks. We still got some Falcons offseason talk to go because we haven't yet reconnected, of course, with our guest this evening, Aaron Freeman, to get his take on what the Falcons have done in free agency. Well, we have gotten his take on free agency, but the whole picture, right? Because now we've seen minicamp, we've seen a little bit of what this team actually looks like on the field, and by a little bit, I mean very, very little. But we've got all the free agency in the books, except for maybe a few moves to come, during training camp preseason. We've got the draft, we've got the UDFAs. Now we've got Aaron Freeman here at Locked On Falcons to help us break it down in more detail and get his take. Aaron, welcome back to the show. How are you doing tonight? Aaron, did we lose you? I think you might be muted.
Unmute my microphone. Yeah. You would think I would do like 2,000
professional podcaster over
here. I'm happy to be back. I'm glad you guys got me back on after minicamp, because the minute I saw James Pierce run 10 yards in shorts, I knew that he was definitely worth that trade up for the Atlanta Falcons. So I'm glad we can get these takes off post minicamp before we get to further OTAs and mandatory minicamp, all that stuff. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. We have to get the how do guys look in shorts takes out there, because that is the time of year. This is the time of year for shorts takes, and James Pierce looks damn good in shorts. There's no way around that. Jalen Walker too, for that matter. But we're going to get to a little bit more than just, how the fit is going at training camp and the news that the offense and defense have switched jersey colors. It appears that the offense will wear black, I think, this year, and the defense will wear white. And that is a change, I think, from previous years.
I won't lie, Kevin. I feel like that's something we could have stretched an entire show on.
Yeah, the deep analysis. We can bring in someone on color theory, perhaps, and get that going. But again, we got to save that for June. But we got lots to talk about because we got to get Aaron's take on the draft class, on the UDFAs, now that we know exactly who we're talking about. And the sort of crux of today's show is kind of the offseason in review. Have the Falcons, now that we've seen the majority of their moves, there will still be things to come, but have the Falcons done enough to actually compete in 2025? We've seen the schedule now, and we're going to be doing a schedule predictions show over the next couple weeks with Eric Robinson as well, so stay tuned for that. But until we actually start picking the games, this is more about looking at the roster and looking at what the Falcons have put together here and figuring out if this is enough. Like, is this enough on paper to compete with the rest of the NFC South, to compete with other teams in the NFC? We're not going to get any, we're not going to be saved from the tush push. The NFL didn't come in and ban the tush push, so we're not going to be able to have that to help us out, even though I think the Falcons were one of the better teams at actually stopping the tush push, interestingly enough, or one of the only teams that was successful at it in any way. But we're going to get to that tonight and sort of continue down the path of trying to figure out how much faith should we really have in this team. And the correct answer to that question is none. But that's a boring answer. This team has shown that they're going to stab us in the back, but we're not going to stop being excited to get stabbed in the back. This is a yearly tradition, and if we can't get excited now, we can't get excited ever, right? I mean, after the draft, spirits are high, so we're gonna try our best to put a nice spin, or at least talk about these moves with the proper couching, of course, but maybe get a little excited. I don't want to speak for Aaron. Obviously Aaron's the harbinger of doom, but but guys, we're going to get to that in just a second. Real quick, I want to bring you a word from our sponsor, BetOnline, folks. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all your sports betting action. Baseball season's in full swing. Nice copy there. I like that one. And the Braves are above 500. Are they still above 500, Adnan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, hold on. Let me double
I
check.
know they play a lot of games in baseball. Like when I checked like yesterday, I think they still were. But
Yeah, it's look, bro, honestly, at this point, baseball is when it's May, it's just sort of
maybe it doesn't matter at this point. Yeah.
yeah, it matters. It's just the standing. They're right at 500. It's just the standings in May are like, okay, bro, like
Okay.
you're 6 games back. Okay, there's another 140 games left.
Yeah, we got a ways to go, but they're not like 0-8 like they started the season. So
Yeah.
perhaps spirits are lifting, things are going better. I did see a tweet about I think the rookie of the year finalists were both Braves, right, with Drake Baldwin and AJ Smith-Shawver. So that's a positive development.
Well, not fine, but that's I guess it's like a rookie of the year type power ranking thing.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Like because I mean it's still May, but
it's very early, very early. Yeah, 0-7, excuse me.
Braves is like even though the farm system isn't like great, they still graduate like 1 or 2 like studs every single year. It's like okay, this should be enough to like make this team a perennial contender, but you have the Dodgers and the NL just spending a small nation's worth GDP on their roster. So
well, you do have to contend with that. Yeah, that is an unfortunate reality of baseball versus the NFL with no salary cap. But if you want to bet on the Braves or perhaps those spicy rookie of the year odds, you can hit that up. They've also got NBA, NHL playoffs, all that good stuff. They've even got live in-game betting options while the games are being played. BetOnline remains the best online source for all your sports wagering info, and in between games, you can head on over to their new online casino. They've got all the top Vegas-style games, including poker, live slots, all that good stuff. And when you sign up, make sure to use our promo code. It's BELIEVE, BLEAV, to get access to the latest promotions. BetOnline, the game starts here. The site, of course, is betonline.ag. Check it out, guys. Thanks. And thanks again for sponsoring the show, BetOnline. Appreciate you. All right. So I figured we did get Aaron's take on just free agency, and I think it was pretty similar to kind of our take, that it was a little bit, like we're waiting to see kind of, is there going to be more here? It wasn't really enough to move the needle for us. But the draft came. Obviously, the Falcons get 2 first-round picks and trade away a 2026 first-rounder, which could be risky, but we're talking about 2025. 2026 is for another day. No, I'm just kidding. We could talk about that, but I mean, Aaron, we had you on during the draft, obviously, to get your reactions to the trade itself, but we've seen the whole class. We've seen the UDFAs they've brought in, and I'm curious now with the benefit of some hindsight, and I know you've done multiple shows on it, how are you feeling about the gambit to go for 2 pass rushers early? Do you think it's something that could pay off or might pay off for Atlanta in terms of getting this pass rush jump-started, which, of course, we know is a desperate need for this team perennially?
Yeah. It's a risky decision that the Falcons made, but as they say, there's no reward without some risk. And as you sort of indicated, Kevin, maybe this regime is not too worried about 2026 because they're not necessarily sold on the idea that if they don't get the job done in 2025, that they'll be here for 2026. So to me, I think the Falcons' decision to trade up, as we've discussed it ad nauseum for like the last 3.5 weeks or whatever it's been, makes sense. It's a risk. The Falcons' history of taking risks usually don't pay off in that way. And so that's kind of what gives me some trepidation, where it's just like, is this going to be number 786 on the gambles that the Falcons have made that didn't quite go in their favor? We'll see. But, I think when you look at James Pierce particularly, right, like there's quote unquote baggage with him. The Falcons feel pretty good about that. We'll see what that turns out to be. But I think you understand the Falcons wanting to dive, feet first, head first, whatever, into, onto the James Pierce bandwagon, because he's kind of a perfect fit for what we expect this defense to be, which is this kind of 4-3 attacking wide 9 defense. And to me, when I look at a player like James Pierce, outside of obviously Abdul Carter, there was probably not a better prospect in the draft for that type of scheme that the Falcons are likely to employ this year. So I understand why the Falcons were willing to gamble on James Pierce. And we'll see if it works out. That's basically how every bet that the Falcons have been making for like the last however many years. It's like, well, I can see how this could work out. I can see how this could go wrong, and we'll have a better idea, in 6 months, whether or not it works in their favor.
Yeah. And I think, like, I was asked on a show the other day, sort of like, what's your grade on this move and all this stuff? And it's like, it's kind of really hard to grade because it's something that is very risky. And I think unless you know what they actually gave up in 2026, it's really hard to grade. Like, if they do make the playoffs and these guys turn out to both be really promising rookie pass rushers, I mean, the Falcons, I don't think are expecting them to be like, oh, they're both 10 sack guys and we have 75 sacks this year. Nobody's expecting that. But talking about guys that, are promising and look like that they're going to be a good return on investment at that spot. And, this team is making the playoffs and delivering a pick to the Rams in the 20s. I think if that were the case, then you'd say like, oh yeah, this is probably a good move for the Falcons. They basically just traded a 2026 pick for an extra 2025 pick, probably about the same range. And according to the trade chart, that would probably be a plus value for Atlanta, considering they picked up a third as well. And if they end up giving the Rams a top 10 pick, then obviously it's an F, and they really shot themselves in the foot. So it's kind of hard to grade overall without the benefit of hindsight. I think, you mentioned it, like they kind of needed to be bold for many reasons that we won't necessarily get into, right? You guys here on this show, if you're watching this show almost in June, I'm sure you're well aware that the Falcons have not made the playoffs in 7 seasons, right? So they need to do something to get over the hump, and apparently just kind of sitting there and picking in the middle of the draft year after year wasn't getting it done. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
In fairness, it was in the middle of the draft. They have been picking top 10.
That's true.
For 3 straight years. But I mean, yeah, it kind of feels like, the GM knows that he may be on the hot seat a little bit, because I mean, I don't think you can sort of justify it if you don't make the playoffs this year. Like, I don't think there's really any justification for not changing out the regime in the front office. So, I mean, if I was in Fontenot's position, I would have done the same thing personally.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's likely to, like, fans were not going to sit around and wait another year. Like, as much as, I talk about this team's best competitive window probably starting in 2026, fans can't wait for that. They're not going to. Like, I mean, they've waited long enough, right? So we have to put something on the field, speaking from the Falcons' perspective, not suggesting that I get to make the decisions. I don't necessarily want that smoke. So just, assuming that, I had the choice. I agree with Adnan's take that the aggression is probably warranted at this point. It sounds like you kind of echo that as well, Aaron, that the aggression makes sense from multiple angles, but it is risky.
Yeah, I mean, I think Adnan nailed it. From Terry Fontenot's perspective, it made sense to be bold and aggressive. From the rest of us that, regardless of what's going to happen this season, that are still going to be here next year, we don't know if Terry's going to be here next year. It is a little bit more risky. It's, potentially if they don't achieve their goals this season, then, there may be a new head coach and a new GM. And we're sitting here having the same conversation that we had 4 years ago when Terry Fontenot took over. And like, oh man, Thomas Dimitroff really screwed over Terry Fontenot, and he's got to clean up Thomas Dimitroff's mess before he can really build his team up. And we might be saying the same thing about the next general manager. But again, like, at this point in time, we'll worry about that in 2026. And so, obviously, as you said, Kevin, we'll have the clarity of hindsight at that point in time. But for the time being, this is the best hand that I think the Falcons going to play.
Yeah, I think so. And moving through the rest of the draft, they seem to have a concerted decision, a concerted strategy, I guess maybe it would be a better way to phrase it, that they wanted to add a lot of ball hawking to the secondary. We saw it over and over again, with the rest of their picks. Xavier Watts and Billy Bowman back-to-back, two guys that basically were the leaders in college football in interceptions. And then obviously picking up Kobe Bryant as an undrafted free agent, who was also in the top of those rankings as well. Seems like a clear decision to prioritize that on the back end. And I think, from a lot of angles that makes sense given the relatively low expectations of the defense as a whole. What do you think about that kind of schematic and personnel decision to really emphasize the takeaways with their picks in the rest of the draft.
Well, it's very clear that the Falcons value production based off of their draft picks this year. And I think, you can understand that. I think to a certain extent that, when you look at the best version of what this Falcons defense is going to be, it is going to, including the team, right? This is an offense. And we heard Jeff Ulbrich say this immediately after the draft. It's like, we expect to score a lot of points. We expect to play with a lot of leads. So they expect the offense to score a lot of points. They expect that they'll be able to play with a lot of leads, and that will allow their pass rush to, and particularly these guys like Jalen Walker and James Pierce, to pin their ears back and get after the quarterback. And they expect that will allow, guys on the back end to be able to do all the things that they do. Jesse Bates doing his cheating, Xavier Watts, Billy Bowman, all those guys making plays on the ball, getting turnovers, and that only fuels the offense's ability to get more points after you get that interception or whatever. Then you turn that into 7 points, and it just manifests. And again, that is a winning formula if the Falcons can pull it off. You look a lot at the last two times the best versions of the Falcons teams in the last 10, 20 years. 2012 defense was basically that, with Asante Samuel being kind of that ball hawk, and Willie Moe and Thomas Deku making all those plays on the back end. That was the last year of John Abraham, not a coincidence probably, that the Falcons were able to pull that off. And then you look at the 2016 team that scored a lot of points on offense. That was an undersized but speedy defense that was geared towards, pass coverage with Deion Jones and all that stuff. And those guys were able to put their best foot forward. So it's a formula that has worked in the past for the Falcons. We'll see if it works this upcoming season. But, when I look at those two picks in particular, Xavier Watts and Billy Bowman, I like both of those players. I think they bring a lot to the table that you like, in addition to the ball hawking skills. I think Xavier Watts can be kind of that deep safety that can allow Jesse Bates to do all the cheating that he does. I think Billy Bowman is a versatile player that kind of has a little bit of Jesse Bates in him, with a tendency to be a little aggressive with how he plays. And sometimes that can burn him, but at the same time, a lot of times that will allow him to succeed. And who better to learn from at the master of, polygamy and cheating and running out on his girlfriend and Jesse Bates with Billy Bowman. So
citation needed. Yeah.
So I think
how to make a no context.
This could be locker or bulletin board material there.
But I think I like what they do. We'll see how Billy Bowman adjusts to the nickel cornerback spot. I think the good thing for Billy Bowman, like if I just looked at Billy Bowman in isolation, I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, this guy's definitely going to be an ace nickel slot guy in the NFL. But given where we're at with that nickel cornerback position with D. Alford, and we don't know what we have with Clark Phillips and whoever else you want to throw in the mix, like the bar is not high that Billy Bowman has to clear in order to be an effective player at that spot. And so even if he doesn't necessarily lock that down, I still think he can be a serviceable option there and have the versatility to do various things for your defense. So I like both of those players, and I think they have both very bright futures in the years to come, even if I don't necessarily look at them as individuals as like, oh, these are elite safety prospects or whatever. But I think right now they can bring a lot to kind of complement what Jesse Bates does and the rest of the secondary does. And then as you continue to develop those guys, I think they can become really sort of ace starters for the Falcons in the years to come.
Yeah, no, I think they're both really exciting, and I was super duper high on Watts, but I agree. He's like a step below that like blue chip guy, like what a Malachi Starks probably would represent to you. But I do really like his ability. And then Adnan, I know Billy Bowman was your guy, so I are you still doing cartwheels after that pick came down?
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely thrilled with Billy Bowman. Like, I would have been happy with that pick in the third round. And the fact that he fell to the fourth round, it just kind of drives home the point that the Falcons, in my opinion, seem to have maybe even changed their approach coming into this draft to the point where, they were sort of hitting on some of that value on what the consensus board was. And I mean, I think Billy Bowman may have been the best example of that. Maybe Watts as well, because Watts was also, I think, Kevin, you graded him out as like a mid-second round prospect whom the Falcons got at the very tail end of the third round with what was a comp pick, basically a fourth rounder, an early fourth rounder. And yeah, I think I saw the chart, the value chart afterwards, which pretty much listed the Falcons as number one when it came to the sheer value that they got versus what the consensus big board was. And that's a huge difference from last year, where I think the Falcons were like 31st or 32nd. Like, they were like very, very low. And this time they were like number one by like a decent chunk over the number two team. So, I mean, yeah, I love that the Falcons went out and prioritized two of the most valuable skill sets that you can have in a defender. One is pass rush. You know, we know the great investment they made on pass rush. It's something that we've been, you know, banging the drum for years and years, for a decade. I remember when we had this show together in January, when the draft process had just started, and we were like, okay, you know, is this finally going to be the year where they go after a pass rusher? That was one of the prevalent questions. And, you know, our answers were, yeah, this has to be the year. This has to be the year where they prioritize pass rush. And then they prioritize it even more than we thought, you know, possible at that time, where they got two of them in the first round. So they prioritize sacks. And the thing with Bowman and Watts, they prioritize guys who can get their hands on the ball and turn you over. Those are two things you can't really, defenders aren't, you know, just street free agents who can, you know, do those two things. And I like that the Falcons are prioritizing premium traits, you know, and it just feels kind of refreshing. It feels kind of refreshing that, you know, after, you know, a lot of the complaining that, you know, I've done and we've done over the years about what the Falcons are and aren't doing in the draft. This is the year where it's like they did all of that stuff we were sort of complaining that they weren't doing for so many years. And I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why we're all still so giddy at this point. And that's something where it's really going to be the wind in our sails to really take us into training camp over the next few months, where, you know, we'll be talking about this draft and this team's potential prospects with a smile on our faces all the way up until, you know, August, September. And that feels like a uncharted territory at this point, because normally, you know, there's always something to complain about at this point.
Yeah. I mean, there definitely is. But yeah, I mean, I think moving through this draft class, you know, you get a potential swing tackle, developmental tackle later. And Jack Nelson's a guy that, you know, is interesting. I think is an intriguing prospect to bring in and potentially develop over time. But I think, honestly, like, more interest was placed on this UDFA class. And I know Kobe Bryant was someone that, you know, I mean, had like an early day 3 sort of grade for me. He was someone that everybody really liked. Apparently didn't interview super well, which led to his fall. But, you know, that's just kind of the headliner. I know Raheem Moore said, "Oh, this is like the most famous UDFA that I've ever encountered." My you know, kids are asking about him or whatever. But what did you think about this UDFA haul, Aaron, considering it seems like the Falcons really like emphasized undrafted free agency for kind of the first time under Fontenot's tenure?
Yeah, this was the first time that, you know, they signed more than one guy that I had heard of before. You know, and so there were multiple guys that I had heard of and multiple guys that people had, you know, going in that day 3 range. And so it was necessary, given that they had very limited picks and they kind of need to hit on all those picks that they did make and some of these UDFAs that they brought in, because, because of the trades, like, they're not going to have as many draft assets in the future. And so if they can hit on, you know, let's say 2 of these UDFAs, and those are guys that are regular contributors on this roster, you know, that is surplus value. That you think about what this class could potentially be with the undrafted free agents, like, you know, it's reminiscent of that 2013 class that had Paul Warlow and Ryan Schrader, and I'm blanking on Joplo Bartu and probably one other player that I'm blanking on right at this point in time that were contributors to Darius Johnson, I think is the other guy. You know, the 1 year wonder of Darius Johnson. I was so hyped on Darius Johnson.
Oh man, I hope Nick Nash can deliver more than Darius Johnson. Shout out though to Darius Johnson. Yeah,
you know, but I think with Nick Nash and Kobe Bryant and Joshua Gray and Josh Simon, among other guys, this is a pretty impressive haul of undrafted free agents, as you said, Kevin, especially relative to what we've seen in the past, where it's just like, yeah, all right, like maybe one of these guys will be a decent sort of competitor, but you have all of these guys that have legit shots at making the roster this year. And so, I've already seen the Kobe Bryant hype. You talk about it, like people are like, oh, he's going to take Mike Hughes' job by like week 6 or something like that. And I'm like, all right, we'll see.
Okay.
I mean, I like Kobe Bryant. I don't know if I like him that much, in terms of his contribution. I thought I was a Kobe Bryant fan, and then the Falcons signed Kobe Bryant, and then I'm like, I realized I'm not as big a fan of Kobe Bryant as this fan base has suddenly become, relatively speaking. So, I think ultimately this is a good group of players. We'll see what they contribute. A lot of these guys at positions of concern for the Falcons, not whether it's in the short term, whether you're looking at that cornerback depth. I liked Kobe Bryant a lot as a potential nickel corner. I'll be curious to see if he gets more looks at the outside or inside corner in training camp. I think the Falcons' depth is probably a little more suspect on the outside than it is right now on the inside. But you wonder, is the starter? We just don't know who the starter is going to be on the inside. So it's one of those things where they have bodies at nickel corner. They just don't know which of those bodies are going to emerge as the starter and whatnot. So I think it'll be interesting to see where Kobe Bryant fits in. Obviously, I think the expectation is Nick Nash will come in and push and maybe usurp Casey Washington for that last 6th wide receiver spot. And, again, a lot of people are like, he's going to take Ray McLeod's job by week 6. And I'm like, okay, I guess, sure, guys. If
might as well go all in if we're going this route,
just go all in. Look, I'm not going to fight people. I'm not going to sit here and tell you to temper your expectations on some undrafted free agents, because again, it's been a long time since Falcon fans could get excited about undrafted free agents. So, go ham, guys. And then Joshua Simon, Kyle Pitts, this is going to be his last year, and Joshua Simon is going to be taking his job next year as the starting tight end. I'm like, okay, Joshua Gray, he's going to come in and take Ryan Newsom's job. I was like, okay, we'll see. Again, I would love guys to be having these conversations, and we're talking about multiple starters like we got in that 2013 haul, where I think collectively between Schrader and Bartu and Warlow, those guys started 150 plus games in the NFL, and that's an incredible achievement for a bunch of UDFAs. And I mean, if we get 3 starts out of this group of UDFAs, that's better than what most teams are getting out of their undrafted free agent class. So it's a ways to go before we get to 150 plus starts, but it is certainly exciting to see what these guys can do. And if, they'll live up to the hype of, taking all these jobs, these starting spots by year's end, as so many Falcon fans want them to be. So, hey, there aren't, as you guys said, there aren't too many things to get excited about with the Falcons the last couple of years. I mean, we always convince ourselves somehow that it's exciting regardless of what they do. But, I think this time it's actually legit.
It is legit this time. Yes, it is exciting. And there are a lot of intriguing UDFAs. Yeah, I agree that jumping to he's going to supplant, X player and by the end of training camp or week 3 or something, maybe a little aggressive. It's not impossible for these things to happen, but more than likely, UDFAs rarely supplant a starter. But what they can do is make a roster, and then all they need is an injury, or something like that. Like the Steelers starting corner that we played in week 1, the nickel corner, ended up starting. I can't remember his name now, but he was their UDFA. Ended up starting in the nickel for them week 1 because I think there was either a suspension or an injury to. Man, I'm blanking out on all these corner names with the Steelers. Anything to do with Arthur Smith, basically, I just try to blank it from my memory. But yeah, Beanie Bishop was the UDFA, and he was replacing Cam Sutton, who I think was either injured or suspended or something like that.
He was suspended.
And and he played the entire year. So yeah, thanks guys for the Beanie Bishop. And Brian Poole's another great example. But it's rare that they will come in and supplant right away, but they definitely can work their way into those roles. And I'm curious, and this is more of a meta conversation, but with Nick Nash coming in, you look at all the other receivers that have been brought in as well, and it's emphasized even further by the fact that they cut Philip Dorsett, who was the one small receiver they brought in other than Jamal Agnew. Everybody they brought in is 6'2", 6'3", and big. It seems like there's a clear emphasis on adding more size to the receiving core, or at least maybe making the slot receiver a bigger, like big slot type that can interchange with the outside guys. What do you think about that idea, Aaron? Because it seems like they're pretty obsessed with size at the receiver position at this point.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason why I'm not as high on Nick Nash is just because I think he doesn't bring anything to the table that Drake London doesn't already have in spades. And so I'm just like, I don't need a poor man's Drake London. I need someone who has a different skill set than Drake London. And I don't know if that's Nick Nash. And so, like, I think Nick Nash is a good player. Don't get me wrong. It's just one of those things where when you look at the Falcons receiver room, for me personally, like, what I think is lacking is some of that. Like, to me, the perfect receiver for the Falcons right now is a player that bridges Drake London's skill set and Darnell Mooney's skill set. That basically he can be, or really, you know, you can throw Ray McLeod in there, because the three things that you would ideally want, and again, this is the ideal scenario, and again, I do not expect you to get this out of an undrafted free agent, but like the ideal sort of skill set I think you're looking for is someone who can stretch defenses vertically like Darnell Mooney does, someone who can do so with the size that Drake London does so they can win more of those contested catches situations, and then someone who also is a more effective and dynamic player after the catch with the ball in his hands. And so obviously I just described the skill set that probably goes in the top 50 in the draft. You know, Luther Burden probably is who I'm describing from this most recent draft class. But like, it'll be interesting to see how the Falcons mix and match their personnel. Like, we know that they want to be an 11 personnel team, that 3 wide receiver set. I don't think anybody's coming for the top 3 guys at this stage, but we'll see. You know, we did get to see at the very end of last season, Kadero Hodge get some run in that role. We know Kadero Hodge is a good blocker. He has more size than anybody other than Drake London in this group. We saw some yak ability with him in some of the games. So to me, like, when I look at this wide receiver core, I kind of go like, yeah, Kadero Hodge probably checks most of the boxes that I think you would probably want in terms of another option outside of those 3 guys. But you know, if any one of these other guys, whether it's a Nick Nash, a Quincy Skinner, or anybody else, you know, comes in and is a rock star in training camp, you know, it'll be a welcome addition, because I think once you get past those 4 guys, you don't look at this group and say, like, you know, I know the Casey Washington hype was crazy last summer. It seems to have cooled off after the concussion that he had against Denver this year. But, you know, you don't look at a lot of these guys and go like, oh yeah, that guy's going to be a stud wide receiver at the next level. And so if they can find a guy, whether that's a guy that they stash on the roster, whether that's a practice squad guy, but just somebody that we can sit here and go like, okay, you know, that's a guy that the Falcons can develop and have a role for as potentially one of the top 3 or 4 wide receivers on the roster in the years to come, is worthwhile. And I think Nick Nash is certainly good enough that he could, you know, pop in that role.
Yeah, I think so too. And I'm really curious. Obviously, you know, wide receiver 6 is like the most interesting camp battle that probably doesn't matter in the slightest, but it's one of the most fun. You know, I don't care that it doesn't matter. I'm in all the way on that battle. But speaking of that wide receiver battle, Adnan, you got takes on all these guys they brought in, Nick Nash, you know, the sort of maybe thought process behind wanting to get bigger at the slot position and all that stuff.
I mean, yeah, it's I agree with Aaron. Like, the top 4 players are sort of locked in, solidified, and then after that, you just sort of want to, you know, throw your darts. And Nick Nash at a collegiate level last year was, I mean, he was a Biletnikoff finalist. I think he was the Biletnikoff runner-up behind only Travis Hunter last season, and you know, the college production was definitely there. And you know, just on this team in general, I feel like this team is one of those where you want to be a UDFA wide receiver on the Atlanta Falcons versus, you know, I would say many other teams, because after that top 4, it's just a completely wide open race. And I feel like this has sort of been the case on this team for a while, for a few years here, just because, you know, especially under the Arthur Smith regime, we thought that, you know, they were looking at Kyle Pitts as that wide receiver 1 type role, with, you know, Drake London being the wide receiver 1, but actually like the, you know, Robin to Pitts' Batman. It turned out, you know, the opposite was true, that Drake London was Batman the whole time. But basically it's, Casey Washington, you can sort of, take him or leave him. I think Casey Washington is going to, make the team for what it's worth. I think he does have the inside track. But after Kadarrell Hodge is the wide receiver 4, who's there as, mostly for special teams prowess, you have 2 spots that are going to be up for grabs, where it's going to be a dogfight for those 2 spots. And, I feel like Nick Nash is one of those guys who, just given, what he's coming from, and given, the success he's coming from, and given his, his strong body, and, that big body, that size, I think that he'll have as good of a chance as anyone to sort of, win one of those, last 2 wide receiver spots, depending on if they carry 6, maybe they even carry 5, who knows. But yeah, it's it would be one. It would still be a success story because even though I also don't think that these UDFAs are all going to be starters at the NFL level next year. Having 1 or 2 of these guys, or 3 of these guys, make the 53, that's a big accomplishment. And then outside of that, I do feel like they're going to pack the practice squad with some of these UDFAs, just given the prowess of this specific class. But I mean, hey, at the end of the day, all Nick Nash has to do is make the roster, and he'll already sort of have a better Falcon career than Frank Darby, who was a 5th rounder a few years ago.
Frank Darby is a legendary personality, so we have to always applaud that. But yeah, I mean, shout out Darby. I think he's maybe trying to catch on elsewhere, or maybe in the UFL. I can't remember what it was that was going on
with
there.
the 49ers right now.
Yeah. Apparently, the Darby's vibes are just immaculate. Like, he just is the guy you just want to keep around. So I just never seem to work out to have him on the field in Atlanta. So hope that he can find success elsewhere, obviously. But yeah, I mean, we talked about 2 of the biggest UDFAs. You mentioned Josh Gray as well, Aaron, and they also added another UDFA center, and I think it was Michael Gonzalez. And you did write a nice piece for the Falcoholic.com, telling people not to panic about Ryan Newsel not signing, which, thank you. I was getting tired of talking about that myself. So now I can just direct people to that article. But, kind of in the same vein of that, Ryan Newsel's unsigned, but that's not a big deal. But the situation behind Newsel is basically entirely unsettled, and that kind of, I think, adds to the overall anxiety about the center position, which, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. That's the biggest question mark sort of roster hole that we have in Atlanta at this point. So what's your thought on sort of the guys behind Newsel? I mean, do you have any interest in, the guys that they've added as UDFAs, or is it Gwyn's season? What are you thinking there?
Well, Joshua Gray was a player that stood out to me last year when he was playing left tackle for Oregon State, and I was watching him go up against Laiatu Latu. And I thought, like, even though Latu got the better of him in that game, I thought he showed a lot of sort of technical things that were intriguing to me, because basically, as you guys remember, Latu was a very technically polished pass rusher, and sort of some of the ways that Joshua Gray was trying to combat and sort of bait Latu, I thought he did a really good job in that game, relatively speaking. And so he was a guy that I was like, I'm going to make a mental note of that guy. And then this past year, he moved to left guard, and, didn't get a chance to really dive deep into his film, but just saw a little bit. And I was like, okay, like, yeah, guard's probably a better fit for, his body type at the next level. And then he goes to the Shrine Bowl, gets some work at the center position. And obviously, I think the Falcons see him potentially as a center. He'll get cross-trained more than likely and get run at both guard and center. And so it'll be interesting to see how quickly he adjusts to the center position. I don't expect it to, again, like I don't expect him to challenge, or I shouldn't say that. He'll challenge. I wouldn't expect him, because he's making a complete transition to that spot. I wouldn't expect him to be the front runner there. But of the guys that they have, of the bodies that they have behind Ryan Newsel, I think Gray is probably the most talented one, and so therefore ultimately talent may wind up winning out, even if he isn't maybe the most polished center prospect. I think the thing with the backup center competition is like, I think the Falcons are clearly telling us that they have a lot more confidence in Javon Gwynn than probably the fan base does and the media does, because we haven't really seen much of Javon Gwynn outside of training camp, and what we've seen in training camp has been, yeah, it's fine. Like
preseason was alarming.
It's like I've seen worse, I've seen better. It's just like it's whatever.
I think he looks better than Peter Kahn, so there is that. And that was a second round pick, right? So
and he was another guy that was transitioning from a college guard to a center. So you figured it would take him some time, and so I think this summer, will be a great opportunity for Javon Gwynn to win some confidence, because when you historically look at it, and I know PFF did a study of this like 5-10 years ago, where they looked at sort of breakout seasons where guys had offensive linemen, it was years 3 and 4 where those guys typically made their biggest jump. And we've seen that basically outside of Chris Lindstrom, most of the offensive linemen that the Falcons have acquired and been success stories made their jumps in years 3 or 4. And Bergeron's going into year 3, so that's a reason why a lot of people, myself included, have high expectations for what he's going to be this year. We'll see if Javon Gwynn can make a mini jump just basically be good enough to be like, okay, he's a backup center. That's good enough. Like, that's all we're really asking for him to be. So that's what I'm really hoping for him at that spot. And then it's interesting because like Javon Gwynn is a player that Dwayne Ledford tried to recruit to NC State unsuccessfully, and then basically I like him. Brandon Parker, the Falcons' current 4th-string offensive tackle, that Jack Nelson is definitely coming for that job, was another player that Dwayne Ledford tried to recruit to NC State and didn't get him. He went to, I think, A&T. And so he was like, I want that guy. And Mike Gonzalez is a player that Dwayne Ledford successfully recruited to Louisville, but then Dwayne Ledford left as Mike Gonzalez was enrolling at Louisville to come to Atlanta. And so he never got the chance to coach him, even though he was able to successfully recruit him. And so Gonzalez played mostly guard, is also potentially making sort of a first transition to the center position. So clearly Dwayne Ledford has a type, right? He's just like, these guys I've known since they were 18 years old, and I want them in Atlanta. I'm going to coach them up. I believe in these guys. And so clearly Dwayne Ledford is calling all the shots. And so because Dwayne Ledford seems to have a greater affinity to Javon Gwynn than everybody else seems to have, I think that's why Javon Gwynn is still the front runner in that spot. But it'll be interesting to see sort of what magic Dwayne Ledford can kind of work with that backup center position. And I think with a lot of these guys, because Ryan Nuzul was a player that Dwayne Ledford didn't recruit, but Dwayne Ledford left Appalachian State having installed the outside zone scheme. That was a legacy scheme when Ryan Nuzul came through Appalachian State. They played outside zone, but Nuzul was primarily a left guard at App State, and then made the successful transition to center. And so I think a lot of these bets that the Falcons are making with these UDFAs are basically like, we're making a Ryan Nuzul bet again. And so in 3 or 4 years, maybe these guys are potentially, being starters for the Falcons at center or guard or whatever. So, basically they have a type is basically what I'm getting at. And so we'll see if that type, manifests in a way that we will feel a lot better about their center depth going into the season than we do right now. And then obviously the other big question is, how confident are we going to be in Ryan Nuzul being, an effective starter? Like, I think we all recognize that he's solid, given he started 12 games over the last 2 years. We've seen solid play from him, but will he be good enough to really move the needle for the Falcons offensive line in the ways that Drew Dahlman did these last couple of years, as we saw his development progress these last few years? So lots of questions yet to be answered on the interior offensive line, but I think, while I wouldn't sit here and say any of the bets the Falcons are making make me feel great about the position, like they all make sense to me, and we'll see if they all pay off.
Yeah, they're all like low cost. It seems like center is the spot where this team is like, you can't just go invest like super resources on every offensive line position. It's like by the time you've finished it, it's like now we got to draft another one. Now we got to draft another first round guy because that guy's retiring, or now we got to pay somebody else. Like it's really hard to either pay or have a high draft pick that you've made at every single spot. So sooner or later you're going to have to try to find either, a day 3 guy or a UDFA or sort of you got to find value somewhere on your offensive line. It seems like the Falcons are going that route at center. And, Dahlman obviously was a day 3 pick that definitely worked out for them. Newsell's a UDFA, seems to be, obviously for what they invested, it seems to be working out. And we'll see if they can sort of hit on that strategy again. And the center position could possibly be a spot where they could save some money, that they will, if this team becomes good and they do have to pay a bunch of guys and they have to kind of cut costs at other spots, that center being a not overly expensive position for them would be very helpful. So we'll see if they can pull that off. But Adnan, how unsettled are you about the state of this center starting position and backups?
A little bit. I'm not gonna lie to you, because we still haven't seen it from Ryan Newsell over the course of a full season. I feel like I was more of a Drew Dahlman fan than most, and I feel like this show is a very pro Drew Dahlman show. And sort of losing him, and I get it. Drew Dahlman wasn't perfect. I know that he was a better run blocker than he was a pass protector, but I feel like the pass protection was sort of improving year over year. And I know that some people were pissed off about some of the low snaps here and there, which yes, like very fair assessment, fair criticism, even though most of the snaps were fine. But with Drew Dahlman, I'm kind of looking at it like I'm not fully convinced that it's just going to be okay, well, we're moving on from Drew Dahlman, who made a boatload of money, who was good enough to make a boatload of money in the free agent market, over to Ryan Newsell, and we're just not going to miss a single beat, and everything is just going to be, even better than it was before, because, the fan base, seemed to have turned on Drew Dahlman up to a certain extent and at a certain point, where now I guess Ryan Newsell is being propped up as this, next great center, which I hope he is. But I don't know, like what we saw from Newsell last year was, it was fine, for those few games. That very egregious penalty against the Saints in the last 2 minutes, notwithstanding, that nobody really talks about because Falcons still got in position and won the game. But the snap infraction, which took 10 seconds off on that last drive. But I'll give it to him. That was, I think, his first real start. So the jitters were there. I think Newsell will be a fine center. I think he will be a downgrade from Dahlman this year. And then beyond that, I don't know about Javon Gwynn. Just looking at what I've seen from him in camp and in preseason, I'm not really sold on Javon Gwynn. The UDFA, Josh Gray. I won't lie to you. I'll take Aaron's word for it over my own, because Aaron has, admittedly watched, a lot more film than I have on him. I wasn't diving deep into day 3 offensive line, film for the draft. But, hopefully he will be, as advertised, and he will, be a player that wins out that battle against Gwynn and, makes that 53-man roster. But yeah, right now, the center position for the Falcons, I'd be lying to you if I was sitting here and being like, yeah, no, it's going to be amazing. The Falcons aren't going to miss a beat, and we're all going to forget that Drew Dahlman exists. But come week 1 and come the rest of the season, I do think that losing Dahlman is going to be a bigger deal than what most people are making it out to be.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be something that the Falcons are going to feel in more ways than one, but particularly in the run game, I think. So we'll see how that develops. But, taking in all the stuff that we talked about, and we talked about free agency at length, but on previous shows. But, coming back to sort of the crux of our review of this stuff, like, what do you think, Aaron? Do you think that they have done enough at this point to that competing in 2025 is a realistic possibility? I mean, what are you thinking about this team's potential to challenge the Bucks or whoever else to win this division, or find a wild card spot somewhere in the NFC?
Well, I think the Falcons have done enough to be in the mix, right? Which is basically what they have done the last couple of off seasons, and they have been in the mix, and then things go awry, usually November, December, and hopefully that will not be the case this year, because we'll get significantly better quarterback play than what we have gotten in the back half of the last couple of years from Marcus Mariota, Desmond Ridder, and Kirk Cousins. And now that problem will be solved. And, if that's the one main issue that's been holding the team back, because we've seen this team in first place in the NFC South with all three of those quarterbacks around week 7, week 8. And we're all sitting there being like, yep, this is our year. We did it, guys. We're already at I can see the summit. We're at the mountaintop. And it all comes, then that avalanche comes as we're screaming yippee at the top of our lungs, and it all comes crashing down on us. And so I think the way that the Falcons have structured their roster, and betting on some of these young players, the hope is that learning curve is going to go up, right? As the year wears on, as they get more reps. And so that will lead to a stronger finish for this football team. So, I mean, for me, I feel like the Falcons have done enough. My frustration with the Falcons is it always just seems like they just kind of barely get over the finish line when it comes to what they do in the offseason. It's never the overwhelming being like, man, the Falcons, like, it's not to say that they haven't tried it, but it's always like every offseason is like, 23, it was like we're spending all this money on the defense, and then we're just trusting in all the young players on the offense. And they'll figure it out. And Arthur Smith's got it, and Arthur Smith didn't have it. And the youth showed tremendously that season. And now it's kind of the opposite, where it's like we've made all these investments on the offense. It's ready to cook. It's ready to go. And we're going to get all this youth on defense, and Raheem and Jeff Ulbrich are going to figure it out. And it's like, okay, we'll see. I hope so. I don't got anything else to do. I don't know about you guys, but like I got all the time in the world to talk about the Falcons all fall and winter. So we'll see how it all plays off. So mostly it's just like I wish that there was one of these off seasons where the Falcons didn't just invest all the resources into one side of the ball. It was like a balanced off season of like, man, we really upgraded like 5 or 6 spots. And it's like maybe they are upgraded 5 or 6 spots this year, but I don't know. It's a lot of, we talked about this with free agency. It's a lot of the same bets that they made with the veterans last year in some of the same spots, and they're now betting on rookies to come through. And it's like, I can see it working out for the Falcons. This is the story we always tell ourselves. Like I can definitely see a path where it works out, and then there's that other path that's full of, shadow and darkness and slimy things that I'm just going to ignore, that they could also be walking down. So it's all that to say is like, they've done enough, but I wish they had done a little bit more. Like, I wish they would have had the same level of aggressiveness in free agency that they had in draft. It's like they're, for my personal taste, like they were a little too aggressive trading up in the draft than I wanted them to be, and they were a little too conservative in free agency. So it's just like they hadn't struck that balance that makes me go like, man, yeah, this is the incredible offseason that I ideally would want, the offseason of my dreams. But at the same time, I do think, given what they were working with, given the limitations, they did all right. And so it's going to be the same bets that they've been making for years and years. Do they pay off finally? Is like, the thing I always say on Locked On Falcons, like this year, it's going to be different. And it's like, hopefully this year it's going to be different. So I think they've done enough, but I wish they could have done a little bit more. But again, I'm always complaining about something. So what would the world be like if I didn't have something?
That's true. Yeah, I would be like, wait, is this AI? Is this AI, Aaron? He's not critical enough. Did somebody train this AI wrong? But I think I resonate with a lot of that. And like at this point, we just need to see them actually succeed. Like I think in several of the past years have done quote unquote enough. And it seems like the team just kind of falls apart, and it's like, is this a lack of talent, or is this just other stuff going on that they can't finish, coaching mistakes? I mean, whatever you want to say, but there's a lot going on there, and I don't know if it's a lack of moves that is the problem or something else entirely. But we will certainly get a front row seat to that this year with the more aggressive approach. And of course, we could still see moves perhaps, leading up to training camp, post camp, post preseason, when we get to cuts. Last year, like 2 of their biggest moves obviously happened, right before the season started. So, while I don't expect that again, we could definitely see something else with that. But yeah, Adnan, what do you think at this point? Do you think the team's done enough with the draft and everything combined to actually be a competitive force in the NFC South this year?
They better have. I mean, well, if they didn't, then we're packing up a top half pick to the Los Angeles Rams next year, and it's going to be a much more somber and negative offseason this time next year for sure, no matter what happens. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that the team that they built around the quarterback position. So if we take out the quarterback position entirely, I think that last year's team versus this year's team is, sort of about the same. It depends on your preferences. It's sort of a give or take type thing. At the end of the day, I don't think it's going to be, the moves that they've made this year versus last year as much as it's going to come down to just Michael Penix. He's going to be the one that sort of decides if this team is going to compete. And, if Michael Penix is everything that they hope and expect that he'll be, then, I don't see any reason why this team shouldn't win this division. Whereas if Michael Penix doesn't sort of live up to those lofty and, seemingly sort of unfair expectations, given that the entire weight of the franchise is now being put on his back, then, I can easily also envision a scenario where the Tampa Bay Bucks 5-peat this division and win it, yet again, because I do think that this will end up being a 2-horse race between the Falcons and Bucks. Now, I mean, the Bucks are getting a little older as a football team. Mike Evans is probably on the downswing of his career, and they're switching out yet another offensive coordinator. So, not everything is ideal over in Tampa Bay right now. But, yeah, I mean, I definitely think that the Falcons can compete. I feel like they better compete because they invested too much in this draft with that trade up for that first rounder to not compete. And, I mean, if they don't not only compete, but if they don't come out of this with at least a playoff appearance and probably a division title, then we're going to be sitting here at this time next offseason talking about what moves we think the new general manager is going to do and his vision for the team moving forward.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And that's kind of like we talked about at the top of the show, right? That's why they made these aggressive moves, because I think everyone's lost patience and are really looking for answers, and we need to know, like, is this going to work or not? And hopefully we will know that it will work, at least to some degree, after this season. I think we all like the boldness and think it's appropriate. It's also risky, but I guess they're kind of, I like that they've kind of boxed themselves into like, well, we have to win now because there's no upside to losing games. Like there's not going to become a point where we're like, well, we should at this point, maybe we pull starters. Like, nope, we got to go 100 miles an hour every single opportunity. And I do think that will lead to the Falcons probably prioritizing decisions to win games as opposed to focusing on the future, which I think at some times in the last couple of years they have leaned more into the focusing on the future than winning games or that sort of thing. I mean, I think you could maybe point to the last Panthers game as an example of more of an evaluation game for the defense than actually, seriously trying to win that game, because I seriously hope that Raheem Morris didn't think that defensive scheme that we saw in that game was the best way to win that matchup. I would have a lot of questions if that were the case, but we will see. And I concur that I do think, after my post free agency show where I said the Falcons haven't done enough, I do think at this point that with the draft and free agency together, that they have moved the needle in a positive direction, particularly on the defensive side. And we'll just have to hope that the loss of Dahlman isn't a debilitating one for the offensive line, And, maybe guys taking the next step, like particularly Matthew Bergeron, maybe that can offset some of the stuff, some of what was lost in Dahlman. If Bergeron can become more of a plus starter as opposed to an average starter, and Nuzul can be solid, then that might sort of overcome that loss to some extent. And I think that would be ultimately a good thing for the Falcons. I mean, obviously the Bergeron being, taking the next step would be good no matter what. But excited to see how this team performs and what they're able to accomplish this year, and what is really a make or break year for Fontenot and possibly Morris as well. So we will see. Yeah. Did you have something else you wanted to add, or?
No.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, we did have, I believe this is an NBA mock draft donation, Adnan. So I don't know these players, but I believe it's at 13, because that is the Hawks pick, the first pick. This is Corey with the $2, says, at 13, Corey wants Asa, or is it Asa Newell?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then at 22, he wants Walter Clayton Jr. So I believe those are college basketball prospects from my very limited knowledge, but yes.
You would be correct. Yeah, no, I'm in on Asa Newell. We need some size, Ham or Sorbet, or, one of those big centers to be the primary backup center. I don't know about Walter Clayton. He's already a year older than Kobe Buffkin, who, he would presumably come in as like the backup point guard. What I want the Hawks to do at point guard is sign like a veteran, like point guard option, like legit veteran backup point guard option. Then I think they want to run it back with Kobe Buffkin again. He was a first rounder like 3 years ago, mid first rounder. So I don't know about Walter Clayton, but I am in on Asa Newell at 13 if he is there.
Cool. Well, that's some good context, because I know nothing about the NBA draft, but it is cool that they have 2 first-round picks. So the Hawks following in the Falcons' footsteps here. So
yeah, it's the cool thing, the not weird thing, but the unique thing about the NBA that they do versus the NFL is there's protected picks.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, for example, the equivalent would have been like for the Falcons to have protected their first rounder against when trading with the Rams, where they're like, okay, if the pick next year is in the top 10, then we keep it. And then, it'll either kick over in the next year for you where the protection will be weaker, or eventually it'll be like multiple like second round picks or third round picks or whatever. So they don't do that in the NFL, but 13 was almost not a pick by the Hawks, because if it was anything higher, then Sacramento would have kept the pick. So we almost didn't get that pick, but it ended up being perfect. Yeah. Because 2 years from now, had they not gotten that pick, it would have just turned into 2 second rounders, which is kind of a lot more work than like a first. But
yeah. Oh man, Asa Newell, hometown Destin, Florida. I grew up about 10 minutes away from there, so I'm in on that pick now.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm all in. A dog. Yeah, the Hawks are about to hit the dog.
Oh, Andy's a dog. Yeah, there you go. Well, that's a slam dunk. But yeah, thank you for the donation, Corey. Thanks, guys. Yeah, I know there was the buzz about the kicker competition. Don't worry, guys. We're probably gonna have a whole show about the kicker competition at some point, because that's event. We're gonna need that. Yeah, we're gonna need that at some point. But thanks so much for joining us tonight, guys. Please like, subscribe if you haven't done so already. What are your thoughts on how the Falcons have done this offseason? Do you like the moves? Do you think they're good enough to compete in this NFC South? Let me know what you think. Let us know in the comments. We really appreciate everyone tuning in and hanging out with us. Thanks again to Aaron Freeman. He's at Locked On Falcons. Aaron, anything you want to plug before we sign off tonight?
No, I just want to let people know that we are going to get Jack Nelson week on the Locked On Falcons podcast, probably that first week in June. So if you haven't gotten enough Jack Nelson content, because I know we spent 30 seconds talking about him, less than 30 seconds tonight talking about it. I'm sure combined over the last 3-4 weeks, Kevin, you guys have spent less than 2 minutes talking about Jack Nelson.
He deserves the shine. He is a draft pick. So
multiple hours of Jack Nelson content coming your way on Locked On Falcons come June and whatnot. So that's probably the only thing I'll plug.
Okay, so Aaron's doing the Jack Nelson work, so I don't have to. I could just send people to Locked On Falcons for the deep dive into to Jack Nelson. And yeah, Brandon, I did see that Eric Robinson won the award. We're gonna give him his shine when he comes on. He's gonna be on next week and the week after, so I'm gonna wait to ambush him with that praise. But that is a good plug there. And yeah, Adnan Ikic with us as well as always. Adnan's at Say Which Way. Anything else you're working on, Adnan? You want to let people know about?
No, I'm just gonna plug the Falcoholic. We are coming up with stuff to put on there throughout this dead period. It's the NFL. There's always something. I guess today's big news was the tush push, not that rule not being struck down. I think it fell 2 votes short. I think the Falcons were pro putting down the tush push, but yeah, just like stuff like that. And I do feel like we would be remiss if we didn't mention the news of the unfortunate news of the Colts owner passing away, Jim Irsay. He passed away. I think the news was reported right before the show began.
Yeah.
So yeah, very very, very sad news over in Colts Nation and in the NFL entirely.
Yeah, no, Jim Irsay was one of the biggest characters in the NFL. Just a really interesting guy that was clearly insanely passionate about his football team. So shout out to Jim Irsay for sure. And yeah, guys, we will be back, obviously, next week. We will have Eric Robinson on. We're going to be doing our season predictions part 1. Because last time we thought we were going to do it in one night, but we actually had to split it into 2 episodes because we went deep on every game. We're going to do that again. I know you guys love that series. We're going to keep that going this year over the next couple weeks, and I'll be back with another show on Friday as well. But yeah, guys, thanks so much for joining us again. Subscribe. That really helps us out. Both of those. If you want to support the show, you can do that on Patreon, patreon.com/Falcoholic or you can join the YouTube channel members as well. And yeah, we will have more content coming your way. We're going to start getting into the roster some more. I'll continue to give you guys updates on anything notable coming out of OTAs as we get more into the summer workouts. And yeah, sooner, we're just a little over a month and a half away from training camp. So we'll keep you guys updated on our plans for that as we get closer to the days and we get some announcements of when that stuff's actually going to happen and if fans will be allowed in this year. I hope that they will be, certainly. But yeah, guys, thanks so much for watching us. I'm Kevin, Knight of Falcoholic, Kevin. And thanks again, of course, to BetOnline for sponsoring tonight's episode. We will see you guys next time on the Falcoholic Live. Have a great night, folks. Thanks.